Rain drizzled softly over the narrow streets of Multan as Piya stepped out of the rickshaw, her dupatta clutched tightly around her shoulders. The evening air carried that familiar scent of wet earth and rose petals from the corner shop where the old flower seller still sat, arranging garlands for the shrine nearby. The city glowed beneath flickering lamps and scattered neon signs, ancient domes whispering to the sky while new buildings reached upward like impatient children. Old and new, faith and ambition, heart and reason, everything in Multan seemed to live in harmony and conflict all at once. Piya hesitated before paying the rickshaw driver, her hand trembling slightly as she searched for the right note. Her eyes rose to the tall iron gates of the Haveli across the street, their paint slightly chipped but still grand, guarding centuries of stories, both proud and painful. It had been 5 years since she had last seen those gates, 5 years since she had walked away from everything she once believed was hers. The rain began to fall harder, drumming softly on her shoulders. She adjusted her dupatta and took a small step forward, her sandals splashing against shallow puddles that reflected the Haveli's lights. Every footstep carried her deeper into memory, the laughter echoing in the courtyard, the sound of Sanwal's voice calling her name, the scent of jasmine that used to bloom near the veranda. Once, she had imagined growing old in that house, filling its silent corridors with her dreams. Now she returned not as a beloved, but as a stranger, older, quieter, and carrying secrets her reflection refused to reveal. Her heart beat faster as she stopped near the gate. For a brief moment, she almost turned back. There was comfort in distance, in pretending that the past had ended neatly. But the truth was never neat, and Multan, with all its ancient wisdom, had a way of calling people back to what they had left unfinished. She looked around. The same banyan tree still leaned toward the corner wall, its branches drooping under the weight of rainwater. Children no longer played there, but the faint echo of their laughter still lingered in her ears. The street vendors had packed their carts, leaving behind trails of steam and the sharp aroma of roasted corn. A soft wind blew, carrying the sound of azan from a nearby mosque, its call gentle yet commanding. It made her close her eyes for a moment, a small prayer forming in her heart. "Give me courage," she whispered. She didn't come here to reopen old wounds, she came to return something that wasn't hers to keep. Yet deep down, she knew it was more than that. The Haveli wasn't just Sanwal's home, it was the keeper of their story, of promises made under moonlight, of silences heavier than words. As she lifted her hand to knock, a flash of lightning illuminated the carved door, revealing faint traces of their initials once etched in secret at the side. Her fingers lingered there, trembling. The rain slowed, as if the sky itself waited to see what she would do next. Inside, Sanwal sat at the wooden desk his father had used before him, the grain of the old shisham polished smooth by decades of hands, men who had carried both the family's name and its burdens. The air smelled faintly of paper, ink, and rain seeping in through the half-open window. A single yellow lamp glowed on the table, casting long shadows across the room and tracing the lines of his face, lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago. His fingers rested on an old photograph, the edges curled, the colors dimmed with time. The image captured a moment from another life, Sanwal and Piya standing side by side at a college debate competition, trophies in hand, laughter frozen in a frame. Her dupatta had slipped slightly from her shoulder, her eyes shining with victory and something deeper, faith in the future. His arm had been behind her, not quite touching, yet protective in its own unspoken way. That day had been the first time he thought about forever. Now, sitting alone in his late father's study, he could barely recognize the man in that photograph. He had spent years convincing himself she had left for ambition, for the scholarships, the city lights, the career she said would make her proud. The letters stopped one by one, then silence. In that silence, he learned to build walls. He buried himself in his father's business, attending meetings, managing accounts, fulfilling duties expected of the eldest son. But when the house grew quiet and night settled heavy around him, he sometimes caught himself looking toward the door, as though expecting someone to walk in, laugh softly, and break the silence again. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, shaking the glass panes. The rain grew heavier, tapping at the window like old memories begging to be let in. He rose and pulled the curtain aside. Beyond the garden, the ancient gates of the Haveli glistened with rain, and for a fleeting second, he thought he saw movement, someone standing there in the downpour, hesitating. He blinked, and the figure was gone. Perhaps his mind was playing tricks again, perhaps not. The past had a cruel habit of knocking when least expected. Sanwal sat back down, exhaling deeply. He had sworn never to feel again, never to let his heart wander into the ruins of what once was. Yet now, the news of her return had unsettled everything he thought he'd buried. His mother had mentioned it casually that afternoon, her voice tinged with something he couldn't name. "Piya is back," she'd said while pouring tea. Just 2 words, but they had echoed in him all day like a forgotten melody. He turned the photograph over and saw Piya's handwriting on the back, tiny, neat Urdu letters, "For the days that will make us proud." His throat tightened. Pride. Love. Regret. They all felt the same tonight. Outside, lightning flashed once more, and he whispered to the empty room, "Why now, Piya? Why after all this time?" But only the rain answered, steady and relentless against the windowpane. Their first meeting was unplanned. Fate rarely announced itself, it simply arrived, quiet and unstoppable, like the rain that evening. Piya had come with a file tucked under her arm, its brown edges slightly damp from the drizzle. The envelope contained records from the scholarship trust once run by Sanwal's late mother, receipts, donation slips, and a handwritten note of gratitude that Piya had never managed to return. She had told herself it was only a formality, a way to close an old chapter. But the moment she stood before the familiar carved door of the Haveli, her resolve began to tremble. Inside, she could hear faint footsteps. Someone was walking toward the entrance. For a heartbeat, she considered leaving the file at the doorstep and walking away, letting the rain erase her hesitation. But before she could decide, the door opened, and there he was. Sanwal stood in the doorway, framed by the warm lamplight behind him, his expression unreadable. Time faltered. The sound of rain filled the space between them, soft and insistent, as though even the sky refused to interrupt. Piya's lips parted, but no words came. She hadn't imagined this moment, hadn't prepared for the reality of his gaze, older now, sharper, carrying both pride and pain. He spoke first. "You shouldn't have come." His tone was low, restrained, but the tremor beneath it betrayed what his pride tried to conceal. The words were not cruel, but they cut nonetheless, gentle wounds born of longing and confusion. Piya held his eyes, her hand tightening around the folder. "Some debts must be settled, Sanwal," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Not all are written on paper." For a second, neither moved. The faint scent of rain and sandalwood filled the air between them. Sanwal's gaze drifted toward the envelope, but he didn't reach for it. He was searching her face instead, as if trying to find the girl he once knew, the one who laughed too freely, who argued with him about everything from poetry to politics, who had promised she'd always return. But the woman standing before him was different, graceful, composed, carrying the weight of something unseen. "You came all this way, for a file?" he asked, his words heavy with disbelief. "It's what I owed," she replied. Her tone was firm, but her eyes softened for a fleeting instant. "Your mother believed in me when no one else did. I couldn't leave that unfinished." He wanted to tell her he didn't care about papers or debts, that what had been left unfinished wasn't in the ledger but in his heart. But pride, the stubborn shield of all wounded souls, held him back. Thunder rumbled above them, and a gust of wind carried droplets inside. Sanwal finally stepped aside. "Come in. You'll catch cold." Piya hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The door closed softly behind her, sealing them once more inside the house where their story had begun, and perhaps, against their will, where it would begin again. Days passed, and the Haveli seemed to remember them. The old corridors, once echoing only with the hum of ceiling fans and the creak of aging wood, now seemed to breathe again. The staff noticed at first how the air felt lighter when Piya's voice floated through the courtyard as she came by to drop off reports or discuss the school trust. Even the walls, weathered and weary, seemed to stand a little straighter when she entered. It was as if the house itself recognized her, as if it had been waiting all these years for her return. The servants, old and loyal, whispered among themselves. Some called it fate, others said it was unfinished kismet. A story paused, now ready to resume. Bari Bibi used to say she'd be perfect for him, the cook muttered to the gardener one afternoon, watching through the half-open window as Piya spoke softly to Sanwal's mother in the veranda. "And look, she's here again. Maybe I'll write some stories in circles." Sanwal's younger sister, Hira, noticed the change in her brother before anyone else did. Once sharp-tongued and restless, Sanwal had become quieter, his words measured, his temper tempered. She would catch him standing at the balcony some nights, looking out toward the main gate long after everyone else had gone to bed. When she teased him about it, he brushed her off, but his silence gave him away. "You've started thinking too much," she said with a grin one morning. He only smiled faintly and walked away. Meanwhile, Piya found her purpose in the small, crumbling school on the edge of the city, the one Sanwal's mother had once funded through her trust. The classrooms were dusty, the benches uneven, but the laughter of young girls filled the air like prayer. Piya began teaching them reading, handwriting, and courage, telling them they could become anything they dreamed to be. In her presence, the neglected institution began to bloom again. The town elders, once skeptical of her return, began to admire her quiet strength. Sanwal's mother often visited the school too, sitting quietly in the back, watching the way Piya taught. There was something familiar in her grace, something that reminded the older woman of her own youth, the patience, the dignity, the unshakable faith in goodness. One evening, she told Sanwal softly, "Your father built many things, but she is building hearts. That's rarer, my son." He didn't answer, but her words stayed with him long after she left. Yet pride, the old, merciless guard of wounded love, stood between him and what he truly felt. Every time he thought of speaking to her, of asking the questions that still burned quietly in his chest, the memory of the night she disappeared returned. The echo of that unanswered silence still haunted him. So instead, he watched from afar, listening to her laughter mingle with the voices of children, knowing that though she was near, 1,000 unspoken words still lay between them like a wall neither dared to cross. When the Urs festival came, the city bloomed in light and devotion. From the narrow streets of Old Multan to the wide bazaars near the shrine, every corner shimmered with life. Colorful banners fluttered in the evening breeze, stalls brimmed with sweets and rose garlands, and the air carried a soft, sacred rhythm, dock dock dock, the beat of drums mingling with prayers. The entire city seemed to breathe in unison, united by the spirit of remembrance and love. Piya arrived early, dressed in a pale green dupatta that shimmered faintly under the lanterns. She carried a small basket of candles, the same way she had years ago when she used to come with Sanwal and his family. This time, though, she came alone. Her steps were slow, steady, her heart calm yet heavy. Around her, devotees pressed forward to offer flowers, some whispering prayers for health, others for forgiveness. The scent of rosewater filled the air, mingling with the deep, soulful voice of a kavval singing verses that seemed to touch even the hardest hearts. As she reached the courtyard of the shrine, she knelt near the marble steps, shielding the flame of her candle from the wind. Her eyes closed briefly as she whispered a silent prayer, one not for herself, but for peace, peace for the past, for Sanwal, for what could not be changed. The world around her blurred into sound and color, the music swelling, the drums rising like heartbeats. When she opened her eyes, a shadow moved beside her. She turned, and there he was. Sanwal stood a few feet away, dressed simply in white, his face softened by the flickering candlelight. For a moment, the noise of the world faded. The crowd, the music, the murmured prayers, all dissolved into stillness. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at her, and she at him. The years that had stretched between them seemed to collapse in that single glance. Finally, his voice came, quiet, deep, almost uncertain. Some debts, he said, his gaze steady on the flame, can only be forgiven, not repaid. The words sank into her heart like rain into dry earth. Piya's eyes shimmered with tears, but her smile was gentle. Then let this be forgiveness, not memory, she whispered. Between them, the candle flame wavered but did not die. The wind pushed, the wax dripped, yet the light endured, steady, calm, unwavering. For both of them, it felt like a sign, a small mercy after years of silence. Around them, the qawwali rose in intensity, the singer's voice crying out verses of divine love and surrender. The words spoke of letting go, of returning what was never truly lost, of the peace found in acceptance. Sanwal exhaled, his shoulders easing, the bitterness finally softening into quiet understanding. Piya lowered her gaze, her tears slipping silently down her cheeks, not of sorrow but release. And for the first time in years, they smiled. Not because their pain had vanished, it never truly would, but because they had made peace with it. They stood together before the shrine, bathed in the golden glow of hundreds of candles, trusting that what was written for them had come full circle, in its own time, in its own perfect way.